You may have seen my first lesson on IELTS Speaking during the week. It was on lexical resource. And basically, over the next number of days, maybe over a week, we're going to look at the marking criteria for the speaking section of the exam, because it's quite confusing, the rubric that the examiner uses. And I wanted to make it a little bit simpler for you, because I believe that if you're looking for a band 8 or 9, how are you going to get it if you don't know what the examiner is looking for? So that's what I plan to do. There's 4 sections to the marking criteria, and we had looked at lexical resource, as I said, and today we're going to look at fluency and coherence. The other 2 sections, grammatical range and accuracy and pronunciation, will be done in future lessons. What does fluency and coherence mean? Let's look at fluency first. So my definition here is the ability to speak smoothly and clearly. Okay, so if you think about your own language, what do you think fluency sounds like? For example, if I came to your country, what would make me sound like a fluent speaker? Would it mean that I'd speak very quickly? Would it mean I would speak slowly or calmly? Or would it just mean that I'm easy to understand? Well, in the IELTS exam, it's very important that you are easily understood by the examiner. And that's what fluency refers to. It's not about speaking really, really fast. It's about speaking at a natural pace, okay? And now I know that's difficult for second language learners like yourselves to understand what a natural pace is, but again, this is all part of the preparation and exposing yourself to English through movies and listening to the radio. You should get an idea of the speed that we speak at, okay? The most important thing is that it sounds natural. This way the examiner can understand what you're saying. So speaking too slowly is another problem, because what it does is it tells your examiner that you don't have the language to complete a sentence. And okay, yes, we do hesitate. We do stop during our sentences because we have to think about what we're going to say. But if you're overusing those pauses, it becomes obvious to the examiner that you don't have the language. Okay, so that's fluency. Let's look at how we can improve fluency. Okay, the first one is speak at a steady and natural pace. Now, that's something that I've already spoken about, but it's important that you relax during your speaking test. Okay, I'll have to be honest with you. When I go live on Facebook, I find it really difficult to relax. I'm already after messing up the PowerPoint in a previous video. So yes, it can be difficult to relax when someone is listening to you and judging you, but it's really, really important to take a deep breath. Don't try to over-impress. Try to be yourself. That way you'll be easily understood, okay, rather than trying to use vocabulary and words that are difficult, particularly at the start of an answer, at the start of a difficult or complex answer, in part 3, for example. But obviously, if you're asked something about your personal life, like do you live in a house or an apartment, you shouldn't really have to think too much about that. If you did have to think, well, I would suggest to the examiner that you just don't have the vocabulary to answer that question. So the next one is practice. Yes. Now, how many people actually record themselves and listen back at the recording afterwards? I don't think many candidates do. You'll be very surprised at how much you learn from listening to yourself speak. I don't want to talk about Facebook Live too much, but when I do listen back to my videos, maybe I sound so much different than I thought I did. Okay, particularly with IELTS candidates, they tend to pause a lot. They tend to make sounds like and they're trying to think of what to say, and that's normal. But sometimes it can get a bit, overused. So that's why listening back to what you're saying is really, really important. Organize and plan. Okay, so at the start of, as I said, at the start of a more abstract question, like in part 3, don't be afraid to take a deep breath before you give your opinion or you discuss a difficult topic, because you need to think before you speak. The worst thing you can do is go in there nervous and just start blabbering off the first thing that comes into your head, because your fluency is going to be affected. Your examiner is going to be confused. You're not going to make sense because you're thinking of the first thing that comes into your head. It's better if you can, now I know we're talking about seconds here, take a breath and think, how am I going to start it? Just like your IELTS writing section or a writing answer. How am I going to introduce the answer? How am I going to develop it? And how am I going to finish it? Okay? So you can avoid a lot of difficulty by actually thinking about what road you're going to take with your answer before you answer. Okay? Now I know this is all easy for me to say, I understand, but when you practice, you will make big improvements. Okay? It's difficult, yes it is, but IELTS is a tricky exam. And the last one, focus on making sense. Now that might sound a bit silly, we won't say stupid, but it might sound a bit silly. Of course you're going to try to make sense. Unfortunately, when you're nervous and you're in the speaking exam, you're thinking about what grammar I'm going to use. You're thinking about the mistake that you made in a previous answer. You're thinking, oh, is the examiner, he's not looking at me, he's not making eye contact. Maybe he doesn't like me. Maybe I'm going to fail. Maybe I'm going to get the score I don't want. All these things run through your head. The most important thing is to relax and focus on answering the question as best you can, and really just making sense. Don't worry about trying to use the grammar. It's too late to start implementing new grammar and new vocabulary. You should have all the work done. Let it flow naturally, okay? If you're going to focus on errors that you make, you're going to pause a lot. You're going to hesitate because your mind isn't in the right place. All right? So that's kind of related to taking a deep breath and kind of calming yourself. All right? Remember, it's a tricky exam, the speaking section, because you're asked a number of questions and it's one after another. So you really got to be in top form, and being relaxed is really, really, really important. Okay. Let's have a look at coherence. Now, fluency and coherence are marked as 1. And you'll see later on in the lesson why they're marked together, because there's a little bit of overlap. So with coherence, the definition I have is the ability to organize your ideas logically and in a way that is connected. Okay. So what's the difference? Well, coherence relates to how easy a speaker is able to transition between ideas and sentences. Okay? So in a way, that's almost like speaking fluently, because again, it relates to how easy you are to understand. Let's say in writing, you use paragraphs. Okay? You use a topic sentence at the start of a paragraph and then you develop it. It's very similar to the speaking section, because in the speaking section you're going to introduce, you might answer the question directly, and then you might give examples and develop that. You don't want to be touching on various different ideas as they come into your head. You want to organize your ideas logically, okay, one after another. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to listen to Laura's sample answer. Now, if you listened to my last lesson, you may have heard Laura in a previous video. And I want you to ask yourself if she's able to transition between ideas smoothly. And what do you think she could do to make her answer more coherent? Describe a recent book you read.
The book starts with people in a park. Well, actually, it was a train, and then they go to the park. And there was lightning. Our teacher told us to read this book and then write about it. The people were playing football at the park, and the weather was really bad. I read the book last month.
What do people think? Was she coherent? Did she organize her answer properly? I don't think so. Okay, in fact, it was quite a poor answer in terms of fluency and coherence. Now, the reason for that is, well, she was asked to describe a book that she recently read. She didn't even tell us the name of the book, which is disappointing. So, she was asked to describe a book that she read recently. And as I said, she didn't even tell us the name of the book. She didn't really answer the question a whole pile. She did describe the book, yes, but we are told at the start of the story that it's set in a park, but then it turns out it's actually a train and then a park. So it's like, it's confusing. She's jumping from the start of the story to the middle of the story and back again. So that's not logically, her ideas aren't in a logical order, are they? The response then suddenly talks about lightning. And you're like, you didn't talk about the weather before this. Why are you talking about it now? Okay, so what has lightning got to do with this story? She didn't explain that. And then we're told how the teacher recommended the book. And then back to the bad weather. So she spoke about the weather, the lightning, then she talked about her teacher, and then she went back to bad weather. And all the time, nobody knows what weather has to do with anything, or the teacher for that matter. If you're confused, don't worry, I am as well. Okay, but this is the point. This answer is extremely confusing, and this is what happens to nervous candidates. They tend to speak the first thing that comes into their head. Okay, and it's not organized in a logical manner. And the examiner is left confused. So there's no strong relationship between the ideas, and they're not explained in a logical way. The examiner is just, he or she is going to be struggling to make sense of it all. So what's the result? It's going to be a low score in fluency and coherence, I'm afraid. Okay. So later on, we'll look at ways we can actually improve coherence. So, how to improve coherence? Answer the question directly. Very important, okay? The reason you should answer the question directly is because you're telling the examiner exactly where you stand on the question. You're giving him or her the position. Remember, it's all got to do with making sense, all right? If you can't explain yourself properly, if you don't answer the question directly, the examiner is going to be confused. And this is what coherence is about, okay? So even though the rubric doesn't state that you have to answer the question directly, you know, it's still good to respond immediately with an answer that relates directly to the question. So, for example, is traffic bad in your country? Yes, it is, or no, it isn't. And then you can feel free to branch off into the various traffic-related topics, okay? But it's important that you answer the question directly first, okay? Because then the examiner knows exactly where you stand. And everything that you say after it is going to support that position, basically. The second one is to avoid hesitation. These are the and the and the So all those sounds we make when we don't really know what to say. It's normal. We do use them in English. In fact, we use them in a lot of different languages. But a second language learner usually overuses them. Okay? So they are acceptable, but again, they're more acceptable for part 3 questions that require thinking time. So there are ways of avoiding those sounds, I guess. You could say things like, let me think, or that's an interesting question. The next one is give explanations and answers, and this is so important for your fluency and coherence score. Okay? A lot of people just give short answers. Now, okay, it probably answers the question. If you're in a coffee shop and you said, yes, there's a lot of traffic in my country, that's fine. You answered the question. But in IELTS, remember, you're going to be assessed on your level of English, okay? And you have to show off your English to the examiner. It's very important. If you don't, well, then the examiner can't give you that high score, all right? Developing your answers with explanations and examples. Excuse me, that should be and examples. So a coherent speaker will always develop their answer. Instead of just mentioning lightning, which actually I think we have lightning here today. I just heard it a while ago. I'm in Istanbul, by the way. It's been really hot all day, and I heard a roar outside, so I'm thinking there is lightning here, which is quite strange. But you should explain what it felt like, okay? You should explain what it sounded like. Scared. So, yeah, you can use your five senses to explain and develop your statement, okay? It's not like the previous answer that was incoherent, the answer that Laura gave us. You can't just mention bad weather and then talk about your teacher in school and then go back to bad weather. No. You pick one idea or topic and you develop it. You can give real life experiences. You can say, last year I was in Spain and the lightning was ferocious. I was terrified, and etc. And you can develop that. And then you can talk about what you did in Spain if you like. You answered the question and you're just developing it. It makes the examiner more comfortable with what you're saying because he or she can understand your story. Okay? If you're going to give one-line ideas, it can get very confusing, and the examiner is going to mark you low in fluency and coherence. All right? The last one is use conversational discourse markers. Now, that's quite heavy if you don't understand what those words mean. You should. Now, discourse markers are also known as linking words, okay, or connecting words. Now, you have seen these in IELTS books or IELTS websites because they're very important to improve your coherence. Now, I added in conversational discourse markers, and the reason for that is because there are some discourse markers we only use for writing. For example, in my opinion. You're not going to be in a speaking test, and if the examiner asks you, what do you think about poverty in your country? English people wouldn't say, in my opinion. Okay, we may write it, but we rarely use in my opinion or on the other hand or something like that. It's more of a thing you would write. Okay, so just make sure you use conversational discourse markers. So what are they? I didn't even explain. Basically, they're words like however, nevertheless, also, that kind of act as glue between sentences. Okay? Remember, it's important that each sentence follows on from the previous one. And these discourse markers kind of act as the the friend between those two sentences. So they're like signposts because they help the listener to understand what you're saying, okay? And they connect your sentences even more. So it's easier for the examiner to understand what you're saying. So if you said something like, even something simple like but, instead of having two simple sentences and you put in but between it, you're telling the examiner that there's a change of idea. Okay, so it's like a signpost. It's directing your conversation and it's making your answer more coherent, basically. So, I'm going to let you see Laura's previous recording today where she answered a number of sample IELTS questions. And she used some of these discourse markers, okay? And I want you to think... I want you to notice how she uses them correctly and appropriately. Okay, now it's important when you are learning discourse markers that you learn how to use them properly. A lot of candidates actually overuse them, which is a problem. You cannot start every sentence with, on the other hand, nevertheless, however. No, you can't. You must use them correctly and sparingly, okay? And that's something that's also actually mentioned in the examiner's marking criteria, the criteria that your examiner uses to mark you. If you use too many discourse markers, you are going to lose marks. Okay, here we go. That climate change isn't a big issue at present. What do you think?
I basically agree with these people. However, I don't know if that will always be true.
What effect does poverty have on small towns and villages?
Unemployment is at an all-time high in many rural areas. On top of that, there's a lack of schools and other educational opportunities for people to gain employment.
What can governments do to reduce traffic in big cities?
The government have the capability to reduce traffic congestion. For example, they could offer public transportation at an affordable cost.
So you got to listen to Laura using discourse markers in a sample, a series of sample questions. Now, you're not going to use them one after another like that, but I hope you got the idea about how they're used and what they can do to enhance your answer. It's all about making your answer flow and connecting everything you say to each other. That's why they're so important, okay? All right, now before we go away, we are going to look at the marking criteria. In general, lower band score students typically use slow speech and repetition, okay? So they usually speak too slowly, okay? And this is more evident when they talk about more complex or abstract questions, particularly in part 3. So the examiner really gets a good idea of your fluency and coherence in part 2 and 3, where you actually talk for a longer time. So it becomes quite obvious at those points. Okay, so again, it's important to have a good general understanding of English before the IELTS exam. I'm sure you know that. The more vocabulary you have, actually, the better you'll score in fluency and coherence. On the other hand, higher band score students, they speak a lot more smooth. Okay, so when I talk about higher band students, I'm talking about band 7, 8, 9. They're not repeating the same words, they're not searching for a language. They sound natural. They don't speak too fast, they don't speak too slow. They just speak at a steady pace And they're usually a lot more relaxed than lower band scorers because they're probably more confident as well. So they answer the question fully. They always give explanations and examples. So they're always developing these ideas. Okay, so whereas a lower band score, a student with a lower band score might answer with one or two sentences, a higher level student will talk about real life experiences. So what about discourse markers? These are words like however, also. On the other hand, these are useful words to use to glue those sentences and ideas together.